Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is returning guest Joshua Slocum, who is the host of the Disaffected podcast. And in this conversation, we talk about his personal journey with regards to the dark triad personality traits, narcissism, borderline personality disorder, histrionic disorder, and so on, and his investigation of the current cultural zeitgeist via that psychological lens. And then we broach into more personal and spiritual aspects of his coming of age and personal and professional development. Wonderful man. You can find his work down there in the description. Without further ado, here is Joshua Slocum. What happened to the studio?
I'm not in there. I'm at home.
Nice. Okay. We get the vulnerable side of you.
Yeah, right. Which part? No,
the part that's crying out for love.
I know, right? Kevin's on the road, actually. He's in and around Salt Lake City right now doing some technical stuff. And I do not know how to, and don't actually know if it's possible given the setup of the studio. I don't know how to run cameras on myself out of there. So
yeah,
home it is.
Yeah, jiggity jig.
All right.
I like your hair.
Oh, thank you. I finally got a haircut.
It's very obviously not a rug.
Yeah. I hope it's obvious enough this time, right? I don't blame people. I mean, I could see the screen stills as well. It did look like a toupee.
Yeah. Well, it's that lighting. It's the whole studio. It has something to do with the suit too, I think.
Yeah. Well, the perverse irony is my hair is so thick that combed the right way, it can look fake. You know how wig hair is thicker than most hair.
Huh.
All right. Let me silence this.
What have you been focusing on with your work?
Oh, what have I been focusing on? The same stuff as usual. Cluster B.
Mm-hmm.
Getting just back into the swing of it this spring since the first almost 3 months of this year, I was basically just treading water to stay afloat. It fell into a pretty serious depression. So I'm just now coming back into starting to feel, like new projects are possible. I haven't been thinking creatively or anything like that. It's sort of a fallow period.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that from the perspective of age, is that kind of a cyclical thing for you? And is it tied to the seasons at all?
I'm not sure. I haven't been diligent enough about sort of noting in a diary. Um, Depressive cycles do come and go for me. I haven't yet identified the pattern. May have something to do with cold and darkness in winter, but that doesn't always happen. So
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, that's boring. Let's not talk about that.
But is it a part of your creative cycle to go into a fallow period to, I guess, feel completely disconnected from caring about work, specifically creative work? And by creative work, I mean your content that you create. Is there like, what's the process of going back online again for you? Like getting interested again, or finding some sort of even anger? Like, I gotta do something,
Yeah, there's that. Not really sure how to answer that because it's this isn't great. I mean, it's not the way, it certainly isn't the way that my decent therapist would advise me to do it. But I experience it more as being swept along than being in control of when it starts and ends. So,
Okay. Yeah.
you know, uh, yeah, it's not something I'm really good at pulling myself out of and I did end up going back on antidepressant medication. I'd been off for 6 months, but I gave it a good 2.5 months of really trying to muscle through the worst of it.
Mm.
And I just felt unable to tolerate it. So
Okay. Yeah.
maybe try again another time.
Well, okay. So you said let's not talk about this and stuff, and I'm not going to press you on it. It's just from the point of view of your content and the stuff that you focus on, you are focusing on investigating the psychological aspects of the cultural zeitgeist. And so
Yeah.
having those insights rooted in a personal understanding, a personal insight opens up the question, like, to what degree, well, I guess, to what degree is working on that which is happening outside of you a way of working on that which is happening on the inside of you? And to what degree is working on the stuff inside of you helpful or useful in working on the stuff outside of you?
Or vice versa. Unhelpful is also possible.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Hard for me to tease out. I talked about it on the show a little bit. I guess I'm not. It's not that I'm embarrassed to talk about it. It's that I'm hearing about somebody's depression can be really wearing for more than 30 or 45 seconds. And there are so many people out there right now who present themselves to the public primarily through talking about their negative mental health symptoms. I don't want to add to that. And I'm sensitive about appearing to be asking for back pats or emotional support from the audience. I don't actually want that. I do get a lot out of feedback from the audience when people tell me that they see the same societal problems and they illustrate that with an anecdote from their life where they see in a different situation a dynamic that I've seen or talked about. I find that very helpful. I do find it reassuring and comforting. But when you are known at all, right, having a show or writing a blog, you're a known quantity and you get fans, right, or regular viewers or listeners, that parasocial connection where people feel like they know somebody they haven't met a little bit more than a random stranger. People, I mean, it's out of kindness, but they feel obligated to be very sympathetic, and I appreciate that in the spirit that it's intended, but it's a thing that I don't want to encourage. I don't want people to feel obligated to do that. I don't want to have that kind of relationship with people, because I see what it does both to people who do it and to their audience. And I spent a lot of time acting more like that when I was younger, really trying to claw emotional support and comfort and sustenance from friends. And I don't want to do it that way anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And that phenomena feeds into the phenomena that you critique, gaining sympathy or acting out from what you called negative emotion of one sort or another to get attention, to get sympathy, is what accelerates the BPD-ness or the cluster B-ness of this whole thing. So
yes,
with that, you're agreeing with me. Could you tell me and the audience how the attention economy either facilitates or attracts these cluster B things? Why does it rely on attention? Does borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and that other one I always forget. No, I always forget borderline because Madonna.
Histrionic and antisocial.
Oh, histrionic. Well, I guess antisocial. Do they all kind of feed on attention, right? Or a certain kind of attention, getting and giving?
Yeah. Let's see. I know you're recording here, and I'm sort of sorry to do this, but I don't know how you're experiencing our connection. But you are mostly frozen or at about 3 frames per second for me.
Okay. Do you hear me fine?
I hear you fine, but
okay.
but the emotion is almost non-existent. I
Okay.
don't know how I appear to you.
You were looking great. I had no idea that there was any problem whatsoever.
It may be on my end. If you want
Be
to
weird.
pause
So
or
too.
allow the audience to watch some behind the scenes, I'm just going to
Okay.
go and
No.
open a door here and see if I
Oh.
that may help my Wi-Fi connection.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum.
Okay, so you were asking about the cluster B personality style and whether it relies on attention.
Yep.
Largely, yes. Not everybody is exactly the same. The antisocials and the psychopaths are a little bit less prone in the classic ways to do this, but certainly, the histrionics, the borderlines, the narcissists, yes, I mean, they rely on outside attention to a much higher degree than most people because they don't have a stable sense of self. They don't have a fully formed, whole, and complete personality. They've got parts that are missing. But they're not the only ones. Personality disordered people are not the only population that can rely too heavily on outside affirmation and attention. Everyone can do that. I do that sometimes. Of course, there are a lot of people out there who are convinced that I do have a personality disorder, so your mileage may vary. Um, but these traits all exist. I've said this before, probably to you. The traits that we point out in personality disorders are not personality disorder traits. They're human psychological traits.
Yep.
Almost all of them will show up in normal range people at some point in their lives as well. Not all, but most all. The difference is one of degree and severity and frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think that's one of the big problems with our modern social media posture and our expectations about that, because it's all about outside affirmation and validation. Because you can't get any real connection with people who are just pixels to you on a screen. So the very structure of how we communicate with each other now encourages that.
Yeah. 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 And so, how do you, I guess in practice, you try to resist that by not flaunting your flaws for attention, like sympathy, something like that. You don't want to use the channels of attention to supplement actual human connection or to, kind of give you some sort of sugar pill of comfort when.
Well, I mean, but I do fall into that. I mean, I have a troubled relationship with Twitter. It has some addictive qualities to it, and it's not the best thing in my life. So I'm not saying that I
Twitter.
figured out how to be above all of this.
What's the deal with turfs, man?
Hold that thought for a second. We'll get there. um, for me, because what I do, what I talk about on Disaffected, what I write about on Disaffected's Substack is about psychological dysfunction. And because I have chosen to be transparent as much as I can be about my own psychological dysfunction, both past and as I've tried to change my mind in the present, I do feel kind of an obligation to be, I said this on the show. I don't know, was it on the show or I say I don't know. Within the past couple of months, don't want, I don't want to misrepresent to people. I don't want to present myself to people as someone who has all of it all figured out. I don't. And I still fall into destructive behavior patterns. I try, I don't know how successful I am, but when I talk about what's going wrong in my mind psychologically, I try to use it as something that will be useful and will prompt productive contemplation in people who read it or watch it about their lives.
Mm.
But I don't know how, people interpret things differently. And I'm sure that some of what I mean as a thought prompter probably strikes some other people as histrionic or attention seeking. So,
Mm. Hmm. Hmm. It's indistinguishable. I mean, people, when they're upset with me, say that I like the sound of my own voice or I'm just seeking attention. I'm like, but you're just seeking attention by retweeting that. Like, and you're just
yes,
grifting. If somebody was cutting you a check, you would probably do more of what you're doing. I mean, there's feedback,
yes.
there's incentive things. So that's kind of cheap slander. It doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah,
Um,
it's easy. It's easy to do, and it's easy to be on the receiving end of. I mean, it comes down to, we humans are hypocrites. That part of our psychological makeup is that we have a certain level of hypocrisy. It's part of our psychology. We will take behavior A. If behavior A occurs in front of you, if someone is displaying behavior A, and this is a person you either already know and do not like, number two, don't know anything about, and you are want to um, you're experiencing what they're doing. It's not somebody you have any emotional investment in. You don't have any context. You don't know them in real life. You're not going to cut them nearly as much slack as you'll cut a friend or yourself. So we do a lot of that. Even if we don't mean to, we end up being inconsistent in how we apply these criticisms to people.
okay. And you bring up hypocrisy. One of the things that, and on some level of the political culture war, where people are like, well, you're saying one thing and you're doing another. You're saying one thing and you're doing another, and you're calling everybody a racist and you're being super racist. So you want that term to mean something when you use it, but not mean something when you do it.
Yeah.
And one of the critiques, and I've seen this for a long time with the critical social justice crowd, or whatever that thing is that hypocrisy doesn't matter as a virtue. Plagiarism doesn't matter as a virtue. The only thing that matters is winning. Yeah, we'll say this thing if it gets us power. We'll say this, and if we'll do this thing, we'll do the thing that we're shaming if it gets us power. So we'll swap out those things as virtue. Virtues are not consistent. And what's troublesome of that is that it breaks people apart. I think it facilitates, like you were saying, certain people with personality disorders, they don't have personality disorders. They're just not fully developed humans. And when you act out of hypocrisy and when you lean into doing one thing and saying another, whatever hypocrisy means, you start to fragment yourself. Like without like a consistent virtue, you start to actually break yourself apart and you lose your core. I think integrity, I got really sick of that word when I was growing up in the church because people just kept on saying, you have to have integrity, you have to have integrity, you have to have integrity. And I'm like, oh God, just I'm tired of everything turning into like a what would Jesus do bumper sticker. But essentially integrity is the ability to in humility witness one's and take account of one's hypocrisies. Just the act of taking account of those hypocrisies and resisting them or asking for forgiveness for them from whomever is an act of like integrating, I guess, in a Jungian sense, the shadow, like just integrating, like, no, I belong to myself. These actions are mine. I am responsible for myself. It's ultimately me who pays. It's me who's accountable to myself, to God, and to those who are closest to me. That is like that movement, albeit uncomfortable and really difficult, that is how one becomes a fuller self. That is how one becomes like less of a fragmented person.
I'm sorry, say again, less of a what?
Fragmented or undeveloped person, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yes. Um, by the way, you have moved on camera exactly one frame in 2 minutes.
Oh no, I don't know. That door opening didn't help anything.
No, no, it didn't. Um, yeah, I think you're right about that. Um, and I think this is probably generalizable. It is difficult. If it's new, if taking real accountability for your what we might call your shadow side, your negative attributes, the ways that you are prone to behave badly, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. Um, if it is new to a person, it's very difficult in the beginning because it has to start with recognition of the truth. You actually have to look into the mirror and realize that you are seeing yourself. And that can be very bracing, right? If you do not have a habit, if you are not used to seeing who you are clearly, it hurts. It hurts when you have to see the
Hmm.
parts of yourself that don't measure up really clearly for the first time. I know what it feels like.
Hmm. Hmm.
Boy, do I know what it feels like.
Yeah.
But when and I'm not, again, I'm not claiming that I have become perfect or even a great practitioner at this, but I do try. Uh, when you make a habit out of trying to be accountable and to see yourself as you are, over time it gets a lot easier. And you, uh, one of the things that stops us from taking that accountability is the legitimate fear of the depth and the kind of punishment that we will receive, particularly on social media. We are we are already punished by people in public conversation on social media when we haven't done any wrong. If they simply don't like our politics, they don't like the cut of our jib, right? People are just kind of vicious there. And if you so people, I think people feel, why would I do anything to make myself more transparent or vulnerable in this context? I already feel like I've got to put a shield up. So I think that defensiveness, legitimate defensiveness, people have a reason. I'm speaking generally, there's always going to be exceptions, but people have a reason to feel defensive on social media.
Hmm.
So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and plus you're not gonna if you are using social media to get something done to advance a political project, then your personal feelings and your vulnerabilities just don't really matter. They come a liability unless part of your political project is to be a real person, which is really rare.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I've been thinking about, sometimes sometimes it takes weeks or months for me to write an essay that I know needs to be written and that is asking to be written, and I'm in one of those phases right now.
Hmm.
I'm in the thinking about it and talking about it and sort of trying sentences out in the shower phase.
Yeah.
Um, I want to write something about my personal psychological relationship to feminism and to women, because it's a constant theme in my life, and it's an obvious theme to anybody who watches or listens to the show. And one thing I haven't made as much progress on as I would like to is, uh, I'm still very emotionally reactive to certain kinds of behaviors and criticisms from women, disproportionately reactive.
Hmm.
They still get me in a place that takes me to anger level 10 in like 2 seconds, which indicates that I've got something to work on, right? I mean, I
Hmm.
know it's very clear to me. I know why it bothers me, but it bothers me that it still bothers me as much as it does.
Yeah.
Um, but in thinking about that, a lot of people have one or two areas, topic areas, whether it's relations between the sexes, political economy, whatever it is, that they carry with them into public and into social media that are really easy thin scabs for other people to pick off. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm not sure I have much more to say about that.
Um, well, here's a question then. Because you brought up women. I brought up turfs because I was joking,
Yeah,
but
all right. So let's combine them. Let's have a twofer.
but I want to take a different tact. Our relations to women are oddly enough, well, okay, so we can get freaking Freudian here, but
Let's do it.
it's obvious from anybody who knows your story that you have a deep relationship with somebody with personality disorder, or like really difficult personality, being your mother. And this mother gave you your body, gave you your start, gave you your startup, and lifted you up in the world. And then I don't know to what extent you've documented the whole story, but it's obvious that she led you on a path of trying to grapple with the things that you're grappling with this cluster B stuff. And you also find it that you're grappling with your own self. You're like, well, I'm finding myself here. The relationship between you and your mother, like there's this other side. It's like, well, okay, you have the relationship to your mother, and then the feminists or women come along and they excite this difficulty or
Yeah.
this anger. But
Yes.
like where I want to go or ask about is like, well, what about your dad? Like, what about your dad? Like, you have to be a man. Like, you can't rely on your relationships to women to define you. You also have to rely on your relationship to your father. And by father, I can mean biological father, stepfather, or just manhood itself. And I'm wondering, like, I'm interested if you want to explore that or speak to that. Like, what about like your sense of masculinity, your sense of authority, hierarchy, all the things that are, for one reason or another, stereotypically male, and to what degree that and working on those helps you to work on this other thing, right?
Yeah. Well,
And you can frame this just as general advice. We don't have to get as personal. I'm really interested in building up men as well as like building up women and building up the
yeah.
harmony
Well,
between those, right?
I'm going to be much more of a student than a teacher in a conversation like that because I'm I'm not, so there's simultaneously probably less to say about that, and in another sense, maybe a little more. I never met my father, my actual father, my real biological father, left my mother before I was born. I've never met him in person. The only contact I ever had with him was in my early to mid 20s when I found him and we started up a telephone and letter correspondence and some exchange of mementos and pictures. And that ended, that brief period of contact ended badly, um, largely because of my behavior. In those days, I was still under the sway of all of my mother's narrative about the world, and I was on my mother's side, and all I could see was the man who abandoned an 18-year-old pregnant woman, um, and I didn't. It wasn't clear to me then, and I don't have an answer for this. What my father did was irresponsible. What both my parents did was irresponsible. You know, getting pregnant without being married, with no even informal commitment that they were going to be a couple together and raise a child. They were both intensely irresponsible. However, had I been my father, I might have run away from my mother too. That's just real. You know, borderline personality is scary. And I learned some things through channels later that confirmed some of the things that my father told me when we were talking on the phone about my mother that at that time I did not believe, and I got angry at him and I yelled at him and I called him all sorts of bad names. I was able to confirm some of those stories later. They were actually true. And they were stories, unfortunately, of the kind of manipulation that I know from personal experience that my mother is very good at. So I didn't give him a fair shake. It doesn't excuse his irresponsibility, but on the other hand, it's not inexplicable either. Um, so I never met my father, and when I was almost 4 years old, my mother married her husband, who is the father of my brother and sister, and he's a very violent man. very screwed up in his own cluster B world. Um, and like, I didn't have any positive male role models. I did not like men as a child. I disliked them. I was intensely afraid of them. I didn't trust them. All men. It did not matter who they were. All men were scary monsters to me. Um, and I emotionally identified with my mother very strongly. And, I was a sissy kid. I liked playing kitchen. I liked playing house. I liked a lot of things. I mean, I wanted to be a fireman. I wanted to be a steam shovel crane operator.
Hmm.
I thought I wanted to be an airline pilot, but I also wanted to be a housewife and a Barbie doll. And,
Huh. Yeah.
so there's this mixture of stuff, but it was emotionally allied with my mother and with women and with feminine concerns for so long. I did not learn how to be a man, and I did not feel like a real man. I felt like a fraud. I felt like a mistake. Um, and although it's certainly not as sharp as it was when I was a kid,
Yeah.
those I still think about those things. I'm going to be 50 this year, and I started this this way of looking at my life, the separation from my mother that occurred at 41. I didn't predict it, but a lot of these years in this decade have been thinking about what does it mean to be a man, and am I one?
Yeah. Yeah. I just had an interview with the man who ended up transition, and his mother ingrained in him a hatred of his masculinity, such that he didn't know what to do with his heterosexuality, where
Yeah.
it converted into an autogynephile where he wanted to be a woman because he
Yes.
wanted to run away from the men. Did you, I guess, did you encounter like the desire to appropriate womanhood to become a womanhood, or did you have another way of dealing with that? And
Oh
also,
yes. Oh
you're not
yes.
you're not heterosexual so far as I know. So it
No,
would
I'm
have,
gay.
yeah. So that, how did that work out? Like that disgust or dislike of your own manhood. You can't just hate men and be one at the same time without something going on. How did you deal with that?
You know, I didn't. It's conflict. It's internal conflict. Um, don't ask me to explain how you can simultaneously be erotically or romantically attracted to a sex that you're also entirely fearful of, but that's what happened to me.
Hmm.
Um, and that's not unusual for boys like me. Um, yeah, prior to puberty, yeah, I I had a couple of ideas about how what reality was. One of those ideas was that I had been born dirty, sinful, obscene, wrong, and deformed.
Okay.
Um, that I was being punished by God for something I did not understand because I didn't know what I had done wrong to merit the punishment.
Hmm.
Um, but I used to pray at night that I would wake up the next morning either in a girl's body because I was obviously supposed to be a girl. I couldn't even be a decent boy, or that I would wake up the next morning feeling like a normal boy, being a heterosexual. So I vacillated between those two desires.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And this is, I think that's very common. I mean, I think it's common for boys like me, including the heterosexual boys. What I what was going on for me psychologically is what we today call gender dysphoria. It's not a different thing. It's not kind of like that. It is that. And it always has been that for boys like me. The difference is we didn't have that name for it, but we also didn't have a society that wanted to calcify that identity and say, yes, this what it is, it's psychological fragmentation. It's early onset mental illness that comes from, in my case, neglect and abuse. Um, but I was much better off, even though there was nobody I never talked to anybody about those feelings. Never, never. Of course, there was no one to talk to. You couldn't say that to anybody.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, I was better off because puberty resolved that. Didn't resolve all my issues, obviously, but I
Mm.
no longer felt that I wasn't actually male.
Okay. Can we, just for the sake of documenting that, your personal relationship with the statistic that puberty solves gender dysphoria, like how did that resolve? Because there is a thing like, puberty does this and 8 out of 10 are gay. That's what the
Yep.
stat is about.
Yep.
Why not to castrate and chemically alter a child for life? Like that's one argument. It's like chill. How did you just like come in line with your sex and let go of that questioning?
There's nothing conscious in my experience. There's nothing conscious about it. It's just the thoughts started to go away. Other
Oh, okay.
things were more interesting. Sex was more interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and
You know
and
what it's like to be an adolescent boy. You know how strong the libido is.
mm, hmm that kind of wiped away all question.
It was yeah. There wasn't room to think about anything else because all I was thinking about was sex.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Huh. So then 41 rolls around, and I kind of have an arc for the conversation, and I hope my frame rate is resolved, or you understand that I'm paying complete and total attention to you, other than this slight little itch in my throat.
I believe you, Benjamin.
Yeah, I hope you do. 41 rolls around, and I guess the defining moment is that you break off from your mother. And then looking at the past decade, which is pretty phenomenal that we get to do this. I mean, I'm just grateful that I get to live so long. Like, whoa, there's another decade. You look at time and you're like, oh man, there's more time ahead of me. But I'm like, oh, okay, well, I learned, I refined. I have a little bit more perspective. I'm chiller now. I'm working on these things. I'm developing and growing. You said something that's really fascinating. I really want to hear any specifics you can give me, what it is to be a man. What were the steps of you, and to what extent, if we want to bring it back to the earlier part of the conversation, having a connection with people and being responsible for them in some way, shape, or form, just via content creation and trying to teach, trying to be a teacher. To what degree that has activated your manhood and activated your paternity, your whatever that is that you need to be in this world, which is a man, not just as a sexual creature or sexed creature, but as a spiritual, soulful human being. Like what it is about being a man you've stepped into, you've grown into over the last decade.
Well, yeah, I I think you and I agree on this. I mean, men and women are different. Um,
I keep on saying
I'm
that, man. I'm like, come here. I keep on saying that.
right.
Nobody believes me.
Like,
Like,
you
no one did it.
guys, look what I just figured out. Um, I speak, this is speaking generally. Obviously, I'm a statistical outlier. I mean, I'm an example of someone who has a very high, I'm a man who has a very high dose of feminine emotionality. But I think it's also true that I have, even if they are inflected with a gay tone of voice or a gay hand mannerism, I think I also have a lot of typically masculine approaches to the world in terms of clarity and directness and holding people to standards of accountability. And I feel a little weird saying this. I'm not trying to fluff myself up, but that's sort of more of a father's approach to the world, whereas a mother's approach to the world is more directly comforting. They're both necessary.
Mm-hmm.
This is why very young children need their mothers more than they need their fathers. But
Mm-hmm.
as children get older, they need their fathers more because there has to come a time when you graduate from your mother's breast in every sense
Mm-hmm.
and step out into the world and take some hard knocks. And you need a dad there to tell you that you're not going to die if you get knocked down, and you can't cry and quit every time you get knocked down. I didn't have that. A lot of people don't have that today because the father
Mm-hmm.
role is vastly underperformed.
Well, it's
And I've
or
said,
performed by the state, which is a kind of a
yeah, in a
feminized.
bastardized and toxic way. Um, you've heard me say this several times. And it's radioactive to say this, but it shouldn't be. The masculine and feminine are so out of balance in the West right now. One of the things that men need to do and women need to learn, men need to start telling women no again. And women need to accept that men are going to tell them no and not put up with their shit.
Hmm.
That's the crude and simple way to put it.
Hmm.
Um, but that's not what's going on right now. And any instances of men telling women no is hysterically, and yes, I mean that. No, I don't apologize for the connotations. I mean it. Is hysterically reacted to with accusations of outright violent hatred, misogyny. You hate women. You want to control women. You want them barefoot and pregnant. It's hysterical in the psychiatric sense. It's not funny. It's emotionally ludicrous and out of control. It's histrionic. There is an excess of feminine emotionality and a dearth of men willing or able to be a buffer against that. And I don't, it's all chicken and egg. I don't know which came first. I don't know if they
Hmm.
are equally feeding each other. I don't know what's the best move to break that cycle. Do you come in? Do women need to come in and do something? Do men need to come in and do? I don't know the answer to this all, but what's the sequence? I don't know. Um, but that has been a significant change for me because up until 41, I was a progressive democratic leftist. My relationship to politics and social issues was typically feminine, but leftist feminine, feminist. Um,
Well, what's the content of that? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, what and why? Why would you code those things as feminine?
well, because because it's more typically feminine and female to be, let's take care of everybody's soft-hearted, bleeding heart liberal, which these days is indistinguishable in many cases is actually simply communism. It's not even being liberal, it's just communism. Um, my mother, for example, I mean, it's very typical of a certain kind of leftist woman. She was a hippie at the tail end of the hippie movement. She described herself as a bra burning feminist in the 1970s. She was an on the street activist and demonstrator against nuclear plants in the 1980s. She screamed at the television about Ronald Reagan and how much he hated women and working mothers, and there was no such thing as a welfare queen, even though my mother was, in fact, a welfare queen
Hmm.
who had simply decided to stop working because of, fibromyalgia or some other, typically
Hmm.
vague medical complaint. And I'm not saying all women are like this, but this is a kind of woman. We all recognize this kind of woman. We're living under her rule right now
Hmm.
in the West. And I was convinced up until 41 that we did live in a patriarchy, that it was as dangerous and bad for women today as it ever had been. Um, I felt guilty for being a man, for having male privilege. I was extremely sensitive to criticism from female friends. And when I started to change my mind, I mean, I lost almost all those. No, I lost all those female friends um, who were also leftists because, and I know that they would have a different story about this. And my behavior wasn't perfect either. There were a lot of ways that because of the way I have been psychologically compromised, I know that I was hard work for a lot of my women friends because I was so emotionally invested in being a good boy because I wanted and thought I needed maternal comfort and approval. And I tried to extract that from friends, not just from my mother. And those are unfair expectations. Those women didn't do that to me, right? That wasn't something they did. That was
Hmm.
what I brought to it. As a result of that, I was extraordinarily sensitive to disapproval from my female friends to an unhealthy degree. Um, so it became impossible to have relationships with them. But on the other hand, when I did start to change my mind, I said, you know what? I don't believe this claim from feminism anymore. I don't believe this. It's simply not true. This is simply selfishness and blame shifting onto men so that women don't have to take responsibility. I mean, I
Mm.
was, you know, what love they had for me turned to hate and disgust. It was not possible to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, what about the good women? Who, like in the intervening years, disconnecting from women who simply by the dint of fact of disagreeing with, you can't be friends with anymore. Like what appeals to you, or what kind of friendships, or what kind of woman is the woman that you want, that you admire, respect, look for approval from, I guess, if you're allowed to say that. I mean, I look for approval from women, but it's got
We
to
all
be a
look
tight
for
circle, you know?
approval.
Yeah.
We all look for approval, but I'm consciously trying not to need or try to extract that kind of maternal approval from female friends any longer. That I
Yeah.
don't want to live that way anymore.
Yeah.
Um, well, I've certainly met. Well, I mean,
I
I'm
mean, I get
learning
that.
things.
I'm lucky. I get to have a wife who's the source of that for me, you know, and I get to
Yeah,
have a really tight source of that, you know.
yeah. I'm learning things in my 40s, soon to be my 50s, that most people learn when they're much younger. But it's obvious to me that I thought feminism was coterminous with what women wanted. That's not what most women want. Those are not the tenets and ideals that the majority of women live by. I did not know this because I didn't associate with anybody who was conservative. And women who were conservative or who said there's nothing, I'm a homemaker and a stay-at-home wife. That's my career. I looked down on these women. They were brainwashed. They were in chains by the patriarchy. I never took them seriously, and I didn't give them enough respect to even thoroughly think through what they were saying and what the implications of that were. But over these past 8 or 9 years, 8 years, 7, 8 years, I have learned that, that's not how the majority of women feel about men, themselves, and the world. So I have made new friendships with women who are far more, frankly, normal than the kind of doctrinaire and ideological female friends that I used to have.
Hmm. And what can you describe, like, how plugging into this other type of woman feels comparatively to plugging in like friendship, like what's more stressed, what comes out, like, and how do you
Right.
operate now, and how has that helped you in your own development or healing, if that's a
Oh, I
term that
do
you
want to
try to.
say something more about father stuff, because
Yes.
I think this relates. And also, I told you I was going to do this.
Uh-oh. You're gonna wait, what are you doing? Oh, your bathrobe.
I'm going to end bathrobe because
Do that. I can do this. It's gonna clash. I don't know. You can give me. I don't know. You're gay. Does red and orange work at all? Should I just take the shirt
it's
off?
so hot.
Okay, it is. It's hot. Okay, it's good. All right, there we go. All right, here we go. I feel like I need a little cap.
No, it got a little chilly here in the corner. We're having a very long winter. Sun's
Really?
out, grass is growing, which is nice. It's nice to see the sun again, but I do actually prefer cold weather, so I'm not upset about this.
Okay. What
But
state are you in?
Vermont,
Oh, nice.
the worst woke state.
Yeah.
Um, people people ask me this. Women, particularly feminists, ask this, and it's a fair question. They ask, you talk so much about your mother, your experience with your mother, how it formed you, but you don't seem to. Well, the least charitable way they say it is, why don't you hate your father or your stepfather the way you hate your mother? The fact that you do not means that you are a misogynist. You preferentially hate women.
Hmm.
Um, because my stepfather was violent. He beat the shit out of me. He concussed my head. He tried to murder my mother while we children watched him do it. Um,
Yeah.
he molested his own daughter, my sister. Um, he was evil. But this is the best answer I can give. You know, sir, I know from close and dangerous personal experience what male violence can do. Of any man, I know it. I saw it. I felt it. I have the bruises. I watched my mother almost be strangled to death. I know what men can do. And I was terrified of him. But he, my stepfather, does not haunt me the way my mother does because there was never any love between us to lose.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was there before he was there. I remember life with my mother before he came into our world. I was there after he left. But my mother was a constant. You know, the first 3 to 4 years of my life, of course, my memories only start, just before about 4 years old. But I have enough of them that I remember life before he came along. It was my mother and my grandmother, and my mother's girlfriends. That was the world that I lived in.
Hmm.
I was an only child, and I had mommy all to myself. Um, and he was part of our lives for 5, perhaps 6 years. I was very glad when my mother finally put him out of the house. Of course, I was ecstatic. I no longer fear this monster. But we never cared about each other. I tried to make him care about me for a while, but he didn't. We didn't like each other, and I ended up hating him very consciously. It's like I fucking hate this bastard. And I suspect he hated me too. There wasn't any pretense,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, if you don't,
He didn't do you any favors, but comparably didn't do you as much damage as.
yeah, and I know that's hard for some people to believe because he was certainly, my mother was physically violent with me too, but she couldn't hurt me nearly as bad as he could. He was a big, strong man. My
Yeah.
mother's a short woman. Mom can do a lot of damage to a small kid with physical violence. Yes, that's true. But the physical danger from him was much greater. The hurt was much greater in the physical sense. Um, but and I don't know if other people are like me, but I don't remember from either him or from her. I don't have any subjective emotional memory of the physical pain of being hit or brutalized. I don't remember that. I mean, I remember it happening, but I don't have any emotional memory of the pain itself,
Hmm.
the physical pain. The emotional pain is what stays with a person. So there was not very much emotional pain from my stepfather. There was fear, but I didn't love him. I never loved him. He never loved me. There was no betrayal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm just wondering if part of the path towards correcting the imbalance and the disconnection of the male and the female and the masculine and feminine in our current year, part of it is criticizing, but the other part is stepping up and stepping into, you know, being the good man and attracting the good, or summoning the good women, or evoking the good in women by being the good in man. And if that is part of the process that you've gone through, because you did bring up C.S. Lewis, this is where I wanted to go, because you said something interesting, like you're changing. I did want to get into spirituality with you, whatever that word means, but like the higher order, like your perspective, like looking down
Yeah.
on this human condition. Does psychology like foist you all that high in describing these things? Anyways.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Um, So, I mean, it is describing everything in terms of psychology. Like, it's helpful. It's a useful tool, but
It's
religion
not the
has
ground
come
of
up.
all being.
Yeah, religion's come up with some terminology or like codified certain ways of thinking that include the psychological, but give you even a greater depth and height from which to view these problems, these struggles, outside and inside of you.
Well, I'm less than an amateur when it comes to religion. I'm someone who was formerly a new atheist hostile to religion. So I'm not that anymore at all.
Hmm.
But I also I'm I don't think I often think I'd like to be a believer. I wish I believed in God.
Hmm.
I don't think I'm any longer actively trying not to believe in God, but I simply don't. And I wish I did.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm not saying that I know I'm right either. I don't know that I'm right. You know,
Yeah.
I may discover that I do believe God is real. That may happen for me. I don't know. Um, but I I do believe in evil,
Ooh.
and I don't know exactly what to call it. I don't know if it's a spiritual reality. I don't know if it's a facet of human psychology, but whatever it is, it's real. And we have all seen so much of it recently. Evil is always with us, but there is so much evil right
Oh
now.
yeah, it's out in the open, man. I mean, what are
It's
they doing to
celebrated,
children? It's
and
celebrating.
that's what I mean when I say things like the devil walks among us
It,
abroad
it
in
it
daylight.
it it's even like you're punished for not celebrating it. That's how
Yes,
flagrant it is.
it is best described by the original and non-sexual definition of the term perverse.
Mm,
Our morals have been perverted, turned away,
mm,
reversed. Um,
mm, mm-hmm.
and I do believe, I don't know quite
Oh,
how to
you're
say
gonna
this.
say something. You're gonna say something.
I I think beauty matters. I think love matters. I find myself aligned with most tenets of what people would call traditional Christian morality and ethics, although I don't right now believe in the existence of a conscious God. I I don't know where else to go with that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you don't have to go in this direction, but I mean, what matters belief? Like if you believe, and I wrestle with that because it's not an issue for me. It's like God is, and like the more I am, the more room in my awareness and life I make, the more closer and intimate I am, and the graceful. It's like a current. It's like there's the wind is like love is. So I look at it when me and Leslie were talking last night, my wife, and we're discussing religious matters. We're discussing like how we perceive reality, and she was talking about God in this way that just seemed so wrong to me, like on a theological level. It sounded like she was describing heaven, and she was using the word God. I'm like, no, God is something different than heaven. And I realized something clicked for me. I'm like, we fundamentally see the world differently, like on a ontological way. She sees relationships and I see objects. Like so when she's describing God, she's talking about heaven or a state of being and relationality, and I'm describing like an order and stuff. And so like even just communicating about that is so difficult because we have to translate. And so when we say I believe or don't believe in God, I'm like, well, what are we even talking about? And is belief even the right word? Are you connected to the source of love? How far away are you from love? How far have you cast yourself out of God's sight? How far has God cast you out of his sight? You know, how deep are you in the shit? How much are you focused on it? Because you can be all the way in the shit, and if your eyes are turned up, you'll see the sun. But if they're not turned up, then you have nowhere else to climb. So it's like when we say believing in God, but still the conversation kind of hinges on like, maybe you're saying, or somebody from your point of view, I'm sorry to put words in your mouth, it's just a conversation starter.
Okay.
Maybe you're saying,
Okay.
like, if I know there's a need for understanding and seeing the world in this way. Like, without God, I'm seeing what these Christians who I totally disagree with, they were saying, beware of a godless world. And now I'm like, oh, I think I see what they're saying, but I have no idea what a non-godless world is. And then they're talking in all these riddles and codes. So like, I don't want to like rehash how I look at reality through like Christian rubric, but I understand there's something there. And I don't know, what were you feeling when you were reading C.S. Lewis? You said something very, very good about that man. He connected with you in some way. He communicated with you in some way. And was it mere Christianity?
Yes.
What was it about that like opened you or like gave you a beneficent feeling?
First of all, just, from what I imagine reading him, he strikes me as, well, first of all, there isn't a hint of condescension or patronization in his writing.
Huh.
He struck me as someone who genuinely cares about people and genuinely wanted to be clear to his audience about what he believed and what he would like them to consider, without haughtiness, without pride, without any indirect manipulation. He just struck me as a thoroughly decent, good, humanistic man. Um, and a lot of this, a lot of what he described about Christianity and Christianity's moral orientation to the world, as this has been going on for years now, I cannot help but notice that the behaviors, the deception, the masks, all of the negative things that we describe in the world of cluster B people, cluster B behaviors, narcissism, sociopathy.
So
they all line up with sin, with the devil, with Satan, deception, self-aggrandizement,
disconnection, malice,
pride, vanity, creating yourself God in your own image. And that's certainly something that we're doing in the era that we live in. I can't help but notice that sameness, that similarity.
Yeah.
So I think that whether or not I actually believe in a conscious Christian God, that believers...
Why do you say conscious? Why is that the word that you modify?
Because that's what's proposed. God is proposed in the Christian faith as a being with a mind and a will. Right? He's not proposed as an inert. Yes. Okay. I mean, I'm not wrong about that. No. There are other conceptions of God. There are people who think that there's God is the universe or God is nature, but it isn't necessarily a mind the way human is a mind. But Christianity does say God is a mind. God is a conscious entity who has thoughts and
God the Father,
desires, all these things. Regardless of whether I believe that entity to be real, it seems to me that the Christians and people who describe the world psychologically the way I do, and there are many of them, we are all talking about the very same real phenomena. We are talking about the same human nature. We are talking about the same moral issues. We're all recognizing something that is real and part of human nature.
Okay. So
So,
that's really, yeah. Okay, continue.
so I think that I didn't expect to find myself in this position, um, but I didn't expect it because my outlook about these things prior to my gradual change of mind was just empty arrogance and insecurity. I'm very insecure about a lot of things. I mean, I'm not a totally healed person. Anybody who watches my show or talks with me or sees me, lose my shit on Twitter can see that I'm still neurotic. Just not in the same ways, and hopefully not to the same degree in the ways that were the worst. But I didn't expect to find myself. I I am more comfortable hanging around with or talking with Christians these days than I am with the kinds of secular atheist people that used to make up my friendship circle because I agree with the Christian morality and
Yeah.
the ethics. And I need to be around people who recognize that evil is real. It's real. And it's
Yeah.
not funny, and it doesn't make you an unsophisticated country bumpkin rube, And these are the kinds of things I accused Christians of my entire life. Oh, how unsophisticated, how bumpkin of you to believe in this.
Yeah.
But it's true. We can't afford we can't afford not to see evil, and we can't afford not to do something about evil, and we can't afford not to call evil evil. we
Okay.
we can't. I mean, maybe we'll keep doing this. I can't afford to do that.
Yeah. The vector then being like the steps of recognizing evil begins at home, right?
Yes.
As well as recognizing the opposite of evil begins with home. I think it begins with the beauty inside. So, in the last 10 years, have you encountered grace in your
Oh yeah.
life? And
Hmm.
what was any particular thing that stood out? You're like, oh shit, I was healed, or oh shit, I can love. Like I had this organ that was dead, and now it's alive, and I can love, or something like that. I don't know.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry.
Yeah, that's what I want. I want make me
um
cry. Actually, that's what I want.
um I don't think I've yet gotten to, let's leave love aside. um
Hmm.
Grace. People have demonstrated grace to me, yes. um Friends, including, well, with the exception of just one or two people, that I still have a decades long relationship with. I don't have any of my old friends anymore. Um, but I have new friends. Um, and I think I've seen grace in the ways that I think friends have extended to me understanding and forbearance that I'm not sure I was entitled to, and they did it anyway.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think so.
What is it? What afford does that afford you when you're given uh, that leeway? Is it the rope to hang yourself with, or room to grow, or?
Oh, I hope not. um, um, so this does make me a little bit emotional, actually. Um, it's it's that, when you don't have the formative experience of being given the kind of normal grace that your family should give you when you're a child, and I didn't have that, um, it's hard to trust it, because my experience from the people who were supposed to love and protect me was that the times that my mother, the times that my mother was loving or performed what seemed to be loving and caring actions to me were never trustworthy. The next day, I could go from being the little boy that she put to bed and sang my favorite songs to and told me that I was her sunshine, to being called a bastard and a son of a bitch the next day. So I learned to distrust expressions of love.
Mm-hmm.
And when I experience, the reason this is making me feel emotional is some of the things that can touch me and make me weep or feel overwhelmed with emotion are acts of kindness. I can cry more easily at those than I do at tragedy. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe other people have experienced something like that. But when someone is genuinely kind to me, genuinely kind, I find it emotionally overwhelming.
Hmm. Wow.
And I never feel like I deserve it.
Yeah.
And I think that's from having friends who have backgrounds similar to mine. I know that this is something that other people can experience too.
When did you start your channel? Disaffected?
January of 21.
Okay. So you're just locked up. I gotta start a podcast. Everybody else is starting a podcast. I gotta start a podcast. That's what we Americans do in times of pandemicide. No?
I'm sorry, we lost audio there for a second.
Oh yeah, we did. You
And
left.
I'm sorry to do this. You're going to have to give yourself an edit point here, Benjamin. But if I don't use the bathroom right now, things are
Okay.
going to be a problem.
All right. I got a marker.
What were you asking?
And why disaffected?
Oh, right. Well, it wasn't my idea. It was Kevin Hurley's idea. Kevin Hurley is my friend and the other half, the co-owner of our little company. He's the producer of the show.
Okay.
It was his idea. I got to know Kevin and a couple of other similar gay men here in Vermont a couple years before the show started, when we were just a handful of us were the only ones that we noticed who were willing to stick our heads up in public and say, this gender stuff has to stop. You have to stop harassing gay bars because you don't like that their name is a drag queen joke. You know, stop accusing gay people of killing trans people. You know, when I started to really get unwoke and started to really react against woke, that's when we all found each other. And we would talk about this a lot and bitch and moan and strategize and all this stuff. And Kevin said, I want to put you in front of a microphone. Okay. So that's how it started.
I guess just the arc of the question is, how do you pay it forward or give it back? Like, you're going through a process and what you're doing is a part of the process that you're going through and stuff. And this is my opinion. You're not a man until you start to become the pillar of society. You know, it's not just running and jumping and inseminating and all the other fun things that men are known to do. But it's actually like being a pillar of the community. And I wonder, how does that manifest for you? You're in the role of pundit / teacher, right? It's kind of a teacher role. You're providing information. But are you yet connecting with people beyond the parasocial, beyond the soapbox to audience kind of style? Do you think that you're being called to, or I don't know, what was the word you used? You're being swept toward counseling, mentorship, is that an aspect of it? Like all
Yes.
the healing and insight that you're gaining, like and who is that you want to help? Who is that? Like young men or just
Anybody,
anybody, any old person?
anybody. Um, yeah, well, I mean, in a quasi-professional way, of course, I also I offer consulting and coaching. It's not therapy. I'm not a
Yeah. Or
therapist.
legal advice, right? Or medical advice?
It's not legal advice,
Do
although
you
I
give
will
any
accurately
medical advice? Do you like,
pardon?
do you give any medical advice? Do you give people like drugs?
Sorry, no. I mean, I have to keep my rates affordable, don't I? Uh, uh, but obviously, most of the people who come to me for coaching and consulting sessions are people who watch or listen to the show. So
Yeah.
it's a self-selecting group of people, and with almost all of them have had a cluster B type upbringing in their home, or they're
Okay.
dealing with it now
Okay.
with their in-laws, or with their public school system, or with their
Okay.
church, or
Yeah.
in their academic professional lives. Um, so yes, I mean, the answer to your question is, yeah, I do feel called or compelled to do this.
Hmm.
I believe what I say. I do believe that one of the most important tools we have to not only protect ourselves from imminent harm, but to be able to do anything that will refashion or redirect society to a more sane and healthful place requires the current modern human living in the 2020s to recognize cluster B dysfunction. We need to know what we're seeing. We need to understand its nature. We need to understand what it means about the people who are caught up in it, what we can expect from them, what we cannot expect from them,
Hmm.
how it will. Because if we don't recognize these things, we're on autopilot, like I was most of my life. And we will not only be unable to identify the actual dangers in front of us, we will make enemies out of people and institutions and practices that are actually to our good. But we will believe that they are enemies, and we will try to destroy them.
Hmm.
That's part of the narcissistic reversal when you are stuck in a cluster B dynamic. Black is white, up is down, pain is pleasure, good is bad, ugly is beautiful. And that's why I call it satanic. I mean, that's
Hmm.
Satan is the original narcissist, the original cluster B, the original liar. Um, I think it's desperately important. I think our society needs this knowledge. That's why I do it.
So, yeah, you're learning about evil. You're talking about evil. One thing I learned about you after I don't know if this is public knowledge, so I don't even know what to say, but you had a career that's close to death. Can I say that?
Yeah. No, that's all fine.
You're a mortician.
No, no. A pain in the ass to America's morticians is closer to the truth. Um, I, um, yeah, for 20 years, I was the executive director of a nonprofit group called Funeral Consumers Alliance. Think of it like it was Consumer Reports magazine, but focused only on the death and burial transaction. So our job was to educate people about what their options were with an eye to affordability, because so many Americans end up feeling as though they've overspent on a funeral, or that they've been financially extorted by an unsavory practitioner. So that's what I spent 20 years doing until my great cancellation. And in that role,
That makes a lot
you know,
more sense. You were in the nonprofit sector then. Of course, it
yes,
was super woke.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was super woke, yeah. Um, but those, that job that job also helped. Well, the job taught me a lot. And I think part of my experience in that job also contributed to my change of mind about politics and things, not just my personal experience with my mother. These things all sort of came along together. Um, and when I was new to that job and sort of the first third to the first half of my time doing it, when I look back now, I think I was too critical of the funeral industry, and I was not giving them enough of a fair shake. And I think I believed too many aggrieved consumers who maybe didn't have as legitimate a complaint as they believed, but it was really they were working out grief and they didn't know what else to do. So, but the 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 depth of ignorance among the adult public about the practical physical realities of death, the legal structure surrounding death, and the ways that commerce and emotion are intertwined for Americans in depth is profound. What people think they know about death, dying, and funerals, you could fit in a thimble. And that's that I'm not criticizing anybody, but ignorance is the only way. I mean, people just don't know anything real or true about it. And it's that ignorance that makes us vulnerable not only to the unsavory exploitative practitioners in the death business, and they are there, but there are also a lot of good people there. It makes us vulnerable to our own foolishness and our own tendency to try to assuage the grief, the shock, the guilt. I didn't do enough for my husband. I didn't do enough for my father.
Hmm.
It makes us vulnerable to commercializing our sentiment and breaking our family's budget by trying to make up for what we perceive to be our inadequacies as a family member to this person who's died.
Hmm.
So, the funeral experience has been twisted in America, and it's become much more of a commercial transaction than a spiritual or emotional one. And I don't think it served us very well.
Or the commercial transaction has grown up to take the place of the symbolic gesture. That is the symbol. That is the spiritual gesture, like the money. Because there's no other. We need that gesture. We need a funeral for some reason. I think it's one of the defining characteristics of the Homo sapiens. Like they have a burial. They for some reason we honor the dead, and we do this transaction. And it's commercialized now. Commerce is just the transaction. It's still.
Yes, but unfortunately, we have forgotten that switcheroo took place.
Mm.
And so, for example, the people who made up Funeral Consumers Alliance, the hundreds of volunteers who ran local information chapters, acted as consumer lobbyists, a lot of very good people, a lot of very community-minded people, a lot of people who genuinely wanted to help people in distress. However, we are human, and we also can get up our own asses. I was certainly up my own ass too far, and a lot of the people in the organization were up in their ass too far. We have all collectively forgotten. So we perceive that sentiment and the symbolic gesture has been co-opted by grubby commerce, right? Mm-hmm. So, the funeral directors are all trying to take advantage of us. Da, 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 da. We gave into that. We decided, okay, well, any funereal gesture is simply lining the pockets of the undertaker business, and all of that was always nonsense. So we don't need anything. I don't need a funeral. I just want to be cremated. I've told my family nobody is allowed to cry. You all have to have a party. So we've gone into complete denial in the opposite direction.
Huh.
Right? We have internalized the idea. We've forgotten that there was something to be experienced that was human, that had nothing to do with conspicuous consumption before the modern funeral industry came along. So we've allowed that to poison our view of the authentic, so that we no longer believe there is anything of value and authentic in these funerary rituals. And I think it's a shame.
Why do you think the grief needs a gesture?
I don't know. I don't know why, but I think you're right that it does.
Yeah.
I don't know
I
why.
mean, we
That's just
talk
how we're
about,
made.
yeah, we talk about virtue signals as though they're purely like narcissistic, but they're not. They're embedded in this is what
Yep.
makes us human. Like we signal
Yes,
virtue. You know?
we signal lots of things.
Yeah.
We're a social species. But a lot of there's a virtue signaling of a kind in the way a lot of people do funerals. Um, I talked to so many people who they were genuinely bereaved, right?
Hmm.
They really were, but they also didn't have, they didn't have the money to put on the kind of funeral that they believed was expected of them by other people, and they would feel very, very guilty. And they would start to question themselves. They would start to question themselves and say, do I not love my mother as much as I thought I did? If I really loved her, wouldn't I find a way to pay this 15 or $20,000? And it's a very sad place to be in. I worked very hard to talk people out of that,
Hmm.
to help them. And it wasn't so much to teach them anything as it was to give them social permission to understand the gen that genuinely felt emotion and bereavement and whatever gesture of honor or respect or recognition they wanted to make to mark somebody's death had nothing to do with how much money you spent at the commercial funeral home. And
Hmm.
if there were any, that was probably the most satisfying part of the job, when I could connect with somebody who was in grief, but who could then be led to allow themselves to separate the commercial and the emotional, and to understand that if they could not afford that open casket funeral with 2 days of calling hours and the catered reception that everybody in town would come to, if they couldn't, that didn't mean they didn't love their mother, and it didn't mean they didn't respect her, and it didn't mean that their family's grief was any less genuine. To the extent that I was able to help people do that, that part was satisfying.
Hmm. Grief. What's next on your plate?
Oh. Well, hopefully an expansion of the show. I mean, Kevin and I have been talking about that for a long time, doing more with the show, maybe more episodes, maybe a different take on our audio. Um, so I think some new things will happen this year. This past year has been difficult in a lot of ways, for both of us. Just, we both have sort of real estate and house concerns. My house got flooded, and it still isn't entirely rehabilitated. And
Oh, sheesh.
Kevin bought a Kevin bought a fixer upper, and it turned out to be a much bigger job than he thought. And the world's sort of crazy, but yeah, hopefully more content, maybe even in a slightly different form.
Okay.
Um,
What's the content of the content though? Do you have designs? Do you have a plot arc? Do you have a focus? Is there some aspect of this that you're
we
bringing?
have some ideas. We'd like to do more with audio only, and we're toying around with the idea of some kind of radio style talk advice show.
Hmm.
So as people can come, people can come to me, and maybe you'll edit this out, but if you'll let me plug it,
No.
you can book time with me at joshuaslocum.net.
JoshuaSlocum.net.
Joshuaslocum.net. Um, that's where I offer my consulting and coaching. But if we could offer a shorter version of that, radio style, I think I'd like to talk to people. I'd like people who are in a tough situation to be able to call up and say, here's what's
Hmm.
going on here. What do you think is going on? And obviously, I can't solve anybody's problems. People can only solve their own problems. What I hope to do with people when I have conversations with them, in coaching, is to allow them, and many people, so I think I'm succeeding at this, and I like that. People tell me all the time, that they were looking for somebody who understood this psychology and understood the fears of dealing with it, that they did not have to censor themselves with.
Hmm.
And you don't have to censor yourself at all when you talk to me privately. Even if I don't agree with you, even if my politics are different, that is not the point of our conversation. The point of
Hmm.
our conversation is to help you see your situation as clearly as possible and to clearly see what your realistic options are in terms of the choices you make about responding to that situation.
Hmm.
That's what I care about. I do not care what answer somebody comes up with. It's not my place to care about that. That's not how I can be helpful. Um, it's not how anybody can be helpful. Um, so I can't, with clients, we often can't solve a problem in just 1 hour, but we can make a big dent in seeing it for what it is and seeing what the roadmap ahead may look like. I'll be able to solve problems even less if people are calling up to talk for 10 minutes or something, but I think there's a place for that. And
Yeah.
of course, we want it to be entertaining. I mean, I care about the topics very passionately that we talk about on the show, but as you know from listening or watching to it, I also care about being entertaining to people. I want to give them a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. What's something that is particularly good for your time, like a hobby or interest or a television series? What brings you
Um,
pleasure, Josh Slocum?
I don't do enough of that.
Hmm.
I don't do enough of that. I should really start practicing music again.
Oh,
Um, I haven't been able to bring myself to do it, but
what, like organ?
piano.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't start taking. I didn't. It's a frustration to me because, at the risk of sounding immodest, um, I'm not a good musician. My sight reading is terrible. My playing is even worse. I didn't take any formal instruction until I was in my 30s. I didn't have it when I was a kid, when I could have developed it. But I do have a good helping of innate natural talent. I have an excellent ear. The grammar of melody and harmony is natural to me. I feel it, I intuit it, and music is very important to me. Um, so I think I should get back into that. I've been thinking about taking some vocal lessons. Maybe I'll try singing.
Oh,
If I
go
can't.
to a choir, Vermont men's choir.
No, no,
No.
no. Not that there's anything wrong. Not that I wouldn't necessarily enjoy it, but there's in my state, there's I that would not be a social grouping I could handle. It is just completely woke around here.
Oh,
I'm thinking more like private lessons.
okay. I'm a lumberjack and I'm so woke.
Yeah, and I'm not like there's. I mean, you're not going to see me doing anything like I'm not going to be joining any goddamn gay men's choruses. Just a
Yeah, we're coming
cauldron of
for your
narcissistic
children.
perversion. And even if it's not overrun by actual perverts, they're all just woke as hell, and I don't
Mm,
want anything to do with that.
man,
So
do you have hope? Are you gonna reverse this ship, or you're gonna be fine either way?
I don't know how to answer that because my intellectual answer, what I think I believe, is that I'm not very hopeful, but I act like I am. I
Yeah.
keep doing the show. I keep writing. I keep talking about these things, and I look like somebody who believes that things can change.
Hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm conflicted.
Well, that's a good place to be, especially if you want to, tease out the fault lines in discourse or in the human condition, I guess, which is just what appears to me you're doing. Kind of trying to look at that shadow, see where it abuts the light, and where those things can bleed into each other. But maybe that's too nuanced and poetic a take.
No, I think it's true. I think it's true. I think we need, and I don't know how to feel about this. There's a moral censor in my head when I think about this that scolds me. Um, I don't wish pain on people. I'm not a sadist. Although every human has an element of sadism and it comes out from time to time, we all have very wicked thoughts about other people sometimes.
Yeah, you should
But I'm
see me
not.
on the road.
Yeah. Um, but I know that it took incredible pain, very personal pain, for me to wake up to the from the torpor, the intellectual, political, and moral torpor that I had spent most of my life in and start to think differently about the world. It had to hurt really, really bad. And I think that is largely true of humans. I don't think I'm unique that way. I think that to make significant change in the way we
Hmm.
orient ourselves to the world often requires an encounter with something very painful and destabilizing. So the soft part of me does not actually wish pain on people, but another part of me hopes. I want people to get to the other side. I want them to be able to start thinking about these things differently and to be able to identify evil and by extension to be able to identify what is actually good, what is actually affirming, what's actually loving. And I think in order for most people to do that, they're going to have to hurt. And so part of me wishes that that come to Jesus moment, if you will, would happen more quickly for people.
Hmm.
They have to go through it first.
Yeah, I mean, there's different levels to it. I mean, just within the gender conversation, the professionals who are on ramping and expediting the destruction of the bodies of children. Like, I want them to feel the wrath, and it's not my
Oh, I
place.
want them to, no, I want more than that. For those who have actively participated in this, with the exception of the repentant, the genuinely repentant people, and there are some of them,
Yeah.
realize they've made a terrible mistake. That matters. Genuine repentance matters. And I don't want to cast anybody out who's had a genuine change of heart. But there are a lot of people who have not had a change of heart, or who are sadistic, or who are narcissistic, or who are just simply of too weak a character
Hmm.
to resist abusing their children or encouraging the abuse of other children. And for those people, I want them in prison for the rest of their lives. I want their freedom taken away from them. I want their names dragged through the mud. I want them excommunicated from polite society, and I want them punished.
And the problem is, it's
And I
all
think
of
that's
polite
right and just.
society. It's polite. It's literally polite society that's doing this.
Yeah, well,
Complicit.
I know, and I'm already I, we have to make our peace
Yeah.
with the reality that we're going to get very little of this satisfaction. The vast
Yeah.
majority of
I
doctors
mean,
and
yeah.
parents who went along with this and did the most heinous evil will suffer zero consequences at all.
Yeah.
Um, that's bitter, but it's reality.
Yeah.
But Benjamin, the trans is a symptom. It's not the disease.
What is?
It's one of the worst symptoms. It's one of the highest morbidities. If you want to use the physical illness model, it's a symptom that can kill you, right? Even if it's not the underlying disease. But it is a symptom of warped thinking that is much, much broader than simply issues of gender.
Yeah.
It's fundamental
Trans.
stuff about right and wrong, truth and lies,
Yeah.
appearance versus substance, um, ec- internal versus external locus of control,
Yep.
freedom, human nature. We're at war. We're at war with human nature, and we're at war with reality across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is one of the most florid eruptions of that underlying illness, but it isn't the underlying illness. And I have very little hope that we will attack the underlying illness and attacking it and putting it in its place. What would that look like? I don't know,
Yeah.
but it might look like It might look religious.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like Joshua Slocum, I think you're on the precipice of another decade of development and deepening of your thought and your perspective on things. And I think the religious aspect of it, I don't have any like pretensions to know in which direction you're going to go, other than you're going to build it pretty strong and firm. But it's going to be interesting where you're leading. And I just want to encourage you not to shy away from leaning into that. Might turn people off, to talk in those terms. And those terms are also very fraught terms. So you have to be careful with those terms. But there's a huge, rich tradition and just thousands and millions of people thinking through these ideas that we've kind of denied on the basis of pride, postmodern arrogance, and
Yes.
thinking that we're beyond them, and then just ignorance. So ultimately, ignorance. We completely robbed this generation of spiritual concepts, and now they're like bawling to Taylor Swift videos like they're having a religious experience.
Well,
Yeah, it's like,
yes,
okay.
because it's all been demonized. It's all been,
Yep.
and it took in me. It really took. But I think I've written about this. When I was a little kid, I wanted to know God. I wanted to be part of a religious communion. And it was not allowed. And in some real ways, it was taken from me. And I became the kind of obnoxious, arrogant, pugnacious atheist that nobody likes.
Never go
And
full
I was
Reddit.
wrong. I was wrong. And now I don't know. Now I don't know what the truth is. But I don't. A couple of years ago, I was still embarrassed to talk about even wanting to believe in God, but I'm not embarrassed anymore. It's
Yeah.
just, I'm just a person. People think these things, people have these needs.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the work you're doing, and also the friendship we've been able to construct, albeit very tentatively and with extreme amounts of distance, but like these little moments where we get to talk, like there's a meeting of minds here, and I just really
I
appreciate
really
what
appreciate
you're
it. I
bringing to the
love
table.
talking to you.
Yeah.
Especially because your temperament is so different from mine.
Huh.
You are calm. You're
You
much
should watch
calmer.
me driving. I go full Slocum when I'm behind the wheel. Traffic is my devouring mother, and I rail against her.
Well, hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, we can meet in person and break
Yeah.
bread together. You, me, and your wife, Leslie.
Yeah, she
Please,
says hi, or she
yes,
said hi
please,
before she took
please
off.
give her my best back.
Yeah, we got to get over. There's another couple of
Quality
set of
woman there.
friends. Yeah, I know people over in Vermont, so definitely I got to head over there. But let's wrap up the recording.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
JoshSlocum.com. You're a .com. You're not .org or .net.
We are disaffected.com.
Okay.
We are on YouTube. We are on all ordinary podcast platforms. My personal site is at joshuaslocum.net.
Okay. Yeah, and people can find those links in the description, as well as probably sprinkled throughout the show. Thank you very much, Josh, for your afternoon. And
Thank you, Benjamin. Thanks for your time.
You exude coziness within that robe. So thanks a lot for breaking it out for us.
Thanks for joining me.
And boom. Thanks.